Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in again. You may have watched yesterday my video on is the rider on the white horse in chapter 6 of Revelation Jesus Christ or not. I gave many different arguments showing that it could be, showing that it could not be. Hope you found that helpful. As you were watching that, you may have been asking the question, well, what about addressing the question of is this person the Antichrist? So I thought I would do that today. I mean, first of all, I think I'm just reminded of that scripture with Peter, don't call unclean what I've called clean. And for those who read it as being Jesus Christ, we're almost wanting to transform it into a sort of satanic parody of Christ. The forces of good, we're wanting to interpret it as the forces of evil. So that's one thing to keep in mind. However, either way, no matter which way you look at it, if it's Christ or if it's not Christ, even if it wasn't Christ, I don't think it is referring to any future Antichrist. I believe that it just could be referring to one of the false Christs that were occurring or appearing in the first century. Here's the reason why I say that. You may remember from that video that I talked about the opening of the seven seals corresponds very closely to the events in the Olivet Discourse when Jesus gave some of the signs leading up to the destruction of the temple. What is interesting about that scripture is that Jesus begins in the Olivet Discourse by giving us the false signs, if you like, or the signs that tell us this is not the signs to be looking out for. And he describes them as this. In verse 4 of Matthew 24, "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name claiming I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. You will hear..." So that would be the white horse right there, let's say, for argument's sake. "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom." That would be the red horse, because red horse represents, the red color rather represents bloodshed, war, killing. And then we move on to the black horse. Continuing in verse 7, "There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of the birth pains." And then when you see we get over to the black horse and the pale horse. Usually in war, a famine would follow from that. And then usually in those conditions, pestilences and plagues would start to come in because of the horrific conditions. So bear that in mind, that the four horsemen just may be within this section of the Olivet Discourse. And then Jesus goes on to talk about that, you'll be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and betray one another. Many false prophets will appear and deceive many. So again, we sort of go back to that reoccurring theme that Jesus talked about in the beginning. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations. Then the end will come. Then, you see, really, the sign that Jesus is talking about eventually is the destruction of the temple when the armies came in. And you see, all of that list is the prelude, if you like, to that. These are all things that are going to happen before that, but they are not actually the sign that it is going to take place. The sign actually is what you heard from Daniel, the abomination that causes desolation. Let the reader understand. Those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And we know in Luke's version it says, he sort of simplifies it for us a little bit because he's writing to a non-Jewish audience. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then it is time for the Christians. It is time for you to get out of there, to save your life. The point I wanted to make is that the reason I think it is not the Antichrist is because the sequence occurs all before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. These are not the signs that you're looking for. Now, what Jesus is saying in that regard there is that these are the things that you will see on a daily basis. There will always be false Christs. there will always be false prophets, false messiahs. There will always be wars, killings, famines, etc. These are the things that we cannot point as evidence that we are in the end times, because which ones would we point to? They happen all the time. So that's the reason why I think this rider fits in nicely with this sequence, that he is just a part of this list, and it has nothing to do with a future Antichrist. And on top of that, the futurists claim that in order to move this scripture into the future, they start doing that at verse 15, the abomination of desolation, the so-called Antichrist who will put up a statue of himself in this third rebuilt temple, and then he will walk into the temple and claim that he is God and demand people that they will worship him. Well, if we look back from my past videos, we've already seen that that is not true. It would be a denial of Christ. First of all, if there was such a rebuilt temple, and the abomination of desolation, Luke tells us what it is. It's Jerusalem surrounded by armies in the first century, the Romans. So the abomination, essentially, is the rejection of Christ by the religious leaders. The desolation is by the Romans. So that is why I believe the rider on the white horse in chapter 6 is not the Antichrist. Now, I will admit I'm still struggling to come to a final conclusion on whether it represents a force of good or a force of evil. I think that would depend on, do you see the four horsemen as angelic beings, or do you read them as demonic beings? So look at that previous video if you haven't seen it on the rider of the white horse in chapter 6. But thanks a lot.